Life is like the ocean. The waves will never stop coming, but you can choose your moment and choose which waves to ride, and you can make life amazing. Hello, and welcome to the Growth Mindset Podcast with me, your host, Samuel Webster Harris. And today, as always, diving into the psychology and practicalities of self-improvement. With me on the show, I'm going to be talking with Alex Dunsdon, who runs Potential VC, and he has built a brilliant framework for happiness and success that I'm excited to share with you today. If you felt like you need to do a bit of a different path in life and like to be slightly unconventional, I think a lot of what we talk about in the conversation will resonate with you. After struggling to fit into the normal mold, Alex has been incredibly successful by focusing on generosity to others, and instead of trying to please people and fit expectations, instead focusing on trying to spend time with the sorts of people who actually accept him for the sort of person he is, who actually like the skills and idiocies that he has, as opposed to punishing them. And there's a lot of wisdom and, dare I say, relaxation from the concepts that we talk about here today that I think help a lot of people chill out and stop being so churned up by the waves of life, and instead take more time to pause and see the opportunities around ourselves and pick the paths that take you to the places you want to go to. So this conversation was honestly one of my favorite conversations with one of my new favorite people in a very long time. And with that elusively mysterious introduction, I give you my conversation with the brilliant Alex Dunsdon.
I was no good at critical thinking. Honestly, I know this will sound really crazy. Until the last 4 years, I've never stopped and thought about anything critically in my entire life. All I did, and I say this to a lot of people, is I just followed where my energy took me, and I was just ridiculously helpful for people. And I basically found out where felt good at the time. And I actually don't think that's a bad way to live life, because I often speak to people who have big career shifts and big career decisions. They're like, what should they do? And they think they have to apply with a job and stuff. And I always say to them, just go and play, go and meet the 20 most interesting people you meet and just increase the surface area of probability. Because there's a guy called Christian Bush who wrote this book, I think it's The Science of Serendipity. But we all live our lives as if there's a plan and as if it's linear. But whenever you speak to people and they go, well, how did you meet your wife? Or how did you get your job? They go, oh, it was a real coincidence. I was like walking up a lift one night and then I had the chat with Bob and Bob introduced me to James and I wasn't even thinking about a career in investment banking and here I am. And for me, it's just surface area of probability. You just have to expose yourself to as many things as possible. And most people are so blinkered in their view of the world and not curious that they never, ever find the thing that they're encoded for or the thing they're meant to do because they get stuck on a track. But the world is chaos. The world is serendipity. The world is lots of dots to bump into and error correct from.
Yeah, definitely. And so like the more potential things that you're exposed to, the more potential that is going to be the right thing. The same as in if you're investing in companies, you're supposed to try and invest in like 100 and one's going to be like huge, as opposed to expect that you're just the best investor ever and you'll invest in 5 and they'll all be amazing.
100%, by the way.
So you spent like the first 10 years doing advertising. Do you think that you maybe could have spent that being a bit more like changing every year or something? And do you sort of regret that in some ways? Or do you think it was good to be in that area for so long to realize that you really were going to burn your eyes out and had to sort of go in this other direction?
It's a really good question. I often think back and go, if somebody had told me how my brain worked and had shown me some kind of path in the world that showed me what an entrepreneurial world looked like, or that there were other things out there, I often think, wow, I could have learned so much more. Because I never really learned anything properly. I actually, because my brain didn't work things out properly, I just learned things by memory. So I do sometimes think about, oh my goodness, if I'd have been pointed the right way and found inspiring mentors and understood who I really was, that's actually probably the biggest point. Who are you really, Alex, rather than this chameleon trying to get on with everyone and please other people? Then I think maybe I'd have done more in the world. Having said that, I'm not unhappy. I feel like I've had a good life and I'm still just getting started. So I wouldn't say I have regrets as such, but I do think about that a fair bit, how much more I could have been.
On the one side, I feel super lucky that I started a business when I was 20 at uni because I was kind of bored during the revision period and I felt like I needed to be doing something that was hard but not revising. And so I ended up writing business plans, sort of a business competition, won it and had to start a business. And then since then I've been running businesses. But if I hadn't have had like a bit of spare capacity, if I'd been in like a different degree or something, I may have just gone through uni, never started a business, and been in the whole like you have to get a job, and which is exactly what I was thinking until I started writing a few plans. But maybe a few months later, I would have found someone else. Who knows? So one side is super lucky, but also I'm like, maybe I spent the last 10 years not earning very much money, doing the kind of the wrong things, and could have been better and more happy, and actually taking the time off when it got to like the evening and had a weekend and that kind of stuff. Because currently I'm like, the idea of taking a day off on the weekend feels like a holiday and could be a bit more relaxed on myself. So it's whatever you're doing, you can always question it. So what was the thing that made you realize that you were kind of doing it wrong after sort of 10 years, that like this wasn't right for you, that you hadn't realized beforehand?
It's a feeling where you go, I just don't want to get out of bed and do this anymore. I don't think it's rational. I think you're just like, this is shit. And it's mixed with fear about what's the other side. Like, I sort of laugh at it now, but I was like, what if I never get a job again? Do you know what I mean? And that was just like a job. And so all I had to compare myself to were a few managers above me in some advertising circles. And there was a world, like it's comical how little I saw of the actual world back then. So, you know, at any time I've made a big shift, it's an energy shift. I just cannot motivate myself anymore. And I'm done. Back in advertising, I did sort of burn out. I got divorced and got made redundant at the same time. So I don't think that was, although looking back, I used to work till like 2 o'clock in the morning loads, because that's just what people around you did. So you didn't really question it. But I wasn't burnt out from work. What did happen was that at the age of 30 or whatever, it was the first time I'd really failed at something societally, or society would have seen me as failing. And because for a decade in my work, I'd always achieved and got promoted and whatever, I'd put a lot of my self-identity into work. So when the work failed, I failed. When the work stopped, I stopped. So I was like anxious for about 3 months. And I was like, what's happening to my head? It feels weird. And then it was all right. And I just started doing venture instead. But that feeling of the first time I'd really failed really hit me. And I think it was because I didn't know who I was. And I put all my identity into my work self. And it's like, if that's not good enough, I'm not good enough.
Yeah, it's really powerful. And I think a lot of people can kind of get lost with what their identity is. And again, like you sort of said, also the whole not really realizing how much of the world is out there when you live in such a silo of, you go through this career and you kind of think you've gone out into the big world, but then you haven't at all. And I always find it really interesting when I'm traveling and stuff, and I'd see people come out for like a week, and like at the end of it, like, oh, I'm ready to go back to the real world, and they're talking about like this tiny sliver of the world that they have in London with their career, and you're like, also these people in Morocco that live in this village, this is their world, and like if you're in sort of Asia, like that's someone else's world, and like the whole thing is definitely the real world, but you only think about one side of it. And also how scared people are to sort of change tracks, whether it's like their location or career, because they kind of only know how to advance in the one that they're at, or like they've got their friends that maybe live in one country, so maybe they've moved there, but they'd never think to move to Mexico or something. But like, I moved to Mexico, didn't know anyone, picked a random village on a map, and within a month had like lots of friends and was like just as happy living there as I could have been in a different one. But I still find it really hard myself to move to somewhere where I haven't got friends already moving there, kind of thing.
Because as humans, we fundamentally need three things if you strip it all back. We need love, we need safety, and we need belonging. And so moving from your tribe, I think the tribe is a really good instantiation of this. Because imagine getting kicked out of your tribe. So I was talking about getting kicked out of my job. You're talking about, well, move to Egypt. Suddenly the thing that gives you the most safety, like you get love, you get safety, you get belonging by being in a tribe. And suddenly if you are just put into a totally different place with a totally different set of people, all of those three anchors are lost. It's even worse if you're kicked out. Like, again, I was talking about being redundant. Kicked out, you're rejected from it versus making the active choice. It's even worse. We don't like the unknown, do we? We don't like too much chaos in our lives. We like order. And so I think you're dead right. I think that what most people don't consider is the opportunity cost of not going to new places. They can only catastrophize about the bad that will happen.
Yeah, it's hard to see things that haven't happened and like the amount of potential that there is. Like you said, sort of the wider your surface area of experiences, the more things that you could happen that you just can't imagine because you haven't seen what they might be, which you just don't really get with like these new places. Whereas obviously if you know you have a friend in like Berlin, you're like, oh cool, maybe they'll invite me to parties and things, but like you'll make a friend within the first few days and Mexico and also get invited to parties, and it's fine. But it's so interesting what you said about tribes around starting a business, because when you start a business by yourself, it's pretty lonely, and if you don't really have anyone to hang out and do things, it's really hard. But I think that's one of the benefits of like accelerators or something, is it does give you a sort of tribe of a bunch of people doing something similar, where you do suddenly start feeling like you belong and you have some like love and safety and stuff going on, which just the way you explained that kind of hit me as a thought. I just felt like saying that.
And it's also a bit of memetics. We want what other people want as well. So if you've got a lot of other people who want the same thing, success off an accelerator, and you can go there and you can all share your experiences, then you're right. It helps take the edge off the loneliness of the whole thing.
It's really nice to be in, well, it literally is like your tribe, because you sort of notice a difference when you're trying to build something and you're constantly sort of thinking about like how to change everything, and you're around people that are just accepting what's going on. You just feel like a weirdo, and people tell you to stop like messing around. And then when you go to like an accelerator, you're around all these sort of slightly conventional weirdos who are just sort of trying to change the world and stuff. You're like, oh, I'm in the right place, and it's great.
It's huge. I once wrote a blog post about finding my tribe. Like I could have like just carried on living in South London, like being around advertising-y people who were kind of cool, and I still love them to this day. But they didn't feel as natural a home to me as being in entrepreneur world. It just feels like more of a home.
I like that description. So that is something I definitely feel with some people, that you haven't known that well, but then you hang out with them or something, and it's just you don't really have to think about how you're coming across. It's just really comfy. And then there are other people where you're sort of constantly always guessing a little bit of like what they're going to think when you say something, and you're not quite sure what to do with yourself.
One of my resolutions at the age of 40 of what a successful life looked like is spending zero time with anyone I didn't want to spend time with. So on the basis that life isn't a single player game, time is the most precious gift we have. The single greatest gift I figured was if I could spend every single moment of every day with people I wanted to versus the ones I didn't. And I've been remarkably lucky. That's pretty much been the case so far. And I think you're just more aware as you get older. You're just better at filtering and just going where the energy's good instead of where the energy's bad. And there's enough people in the world, I believe, where you can do that.
Yeah, you sort of don't put yourself out there enough. That's a really interesting concept. I like the way you describe it as well around a single player game, and the fact that you sort of get the way you just ability to understand people and yourself as you get older is really interesting. But could you explain like life as a game, as a single player game or multiplayer game a bit more? Because that sounds kind of interesting.
Yeah, I think it's just life is just simply the things you create with other people. Memories, emotions, actual things. Unless you're going to become a monk, it's pretty lonely to just go and do things on your own. And so, again, this is just the way that I just naturally think about the world because it's the way I'm built. If you just go out and you just give to loads and loads of people, like life magically works out. Just go and be helpful, go and be nice, give them time. And to be honest, I can only really speak from my own experience. That's basically all I did with no plan. That's all I've done. My two skills have been through fear, frankly, just going and giving energy to other people and then attaching myself to the kind of people who give me the autonomy and freedom to be me. And the guys at Saatchi did that. Doug does that with me at Potential. And so I'm really grateful to be able to find those environments, which I think are quite rare. If I've got two skills, I think it's that, giving energy and finding people who let me be me.
That's a really nice formula for life. I certainly agree on the whole life is something that you just create every single day. I wrote this blog post around, I don't think it's actually that original now in hindsight, but sort of if you think of yourself as literally like an author who's writing like the book of your life and each day is a page kind of thing. It's like, it's sort of you have to read this book whether or not you want to, and you may as well try and make each page as interesting as possible. And if you make it interesting enough, other people might want to read it as well. And when you have like two options come up in a day of do the exact same thing as before or like do something interesting because it's like there's just a chance it's coming, it's going to go, like take the chance kind of thing. In terms of life as a game, it's just be more curious and do interesting stuff. And then same on like you definitely get things from just giving. And I feel like it's almost a selfish strategy of being bloody lovely. And it's kind of absurd, especially I think it's something I really recognized from, I did like the 10-day Vipassana where you spent like 10 days with yourself really thinking about things and like just understanding where I'd kind of cut myself off from being a little bit hesitant on being nice, or sort of being concerned about what I might be losing and stuff, and then realizing that actually now I find it like really stupid when people do things where they're kind of being selfish and stuff, and you're like, but you're just hindering yourself from all the potential things that could come your way. When people get angry or anything, it's just, yeah, I kind of think of them as like a bit dumb and not like that able to understand what's going on in the world, which is a hard one to really necessarily explain to people, but it took me a lot of time to work that out in myself.
So here's an example of a doctor join. Yesterday evening, I spoke to a woman. She's at that moment where on one side, she's like, must achieve, must do career. On the other side, she's like an artist and creative and like that. And anyway, we were talking about ayahuasca and mushrooms and just turning off your brain for 6 months and just doing what feels good to just connect with your true self and all that stuff. But she ended up going, well, maybe the thing I will do is not that, but I'll do a 10-day Vipassana. But she's still teetering. But if I intro you to her and you can tell her about your experience, you might help change her life just through a 5-minute chat. And that's just a great, easy thing. Not much time for me, not much time for you, might be transformational for her.
I love doing that, as in there's lots of ways that aren't that much effort where you can really help. And like when there's not that much effort, you just like always just do that kind of thing. And yeah, people, it sort of makes a big impact on someone's other side, but like it's nothing for you. Obviously, the ones which are actually a much more of a sacrifice. But cool. I definitely have a few good stories from Vipassana and things. And I think that nicely leads into potential around what you're doing with that as a organization, because it's not, well, on the one side, it's the UN sustainability goals and building VCs. And then on the other side, you guys just are really focused on the potential of people and the world and kind of helping people find themselves and their tribes and kind of grow. So could you sort of explain like how you came to that concept?
So this started in, I don't know, maybe 2018, maybe 2017. And it was Doug Scott, myself, and a guy called Chris Topman. We were messing around on the internet. We're all supposed to be doing our day job as investors, but this thing called Linky Brains happened, which it was sort of our way of describing this group of outsiders in the world, non-linear thinkers who joined dots. And we had this feeling that there were loads of them, but they were like hiding because they were stuck in the corner of Deloitte, or they were trying to fit into a specialized mechanistic world, or their talents were dulled by the education system. And all we really did is we wrote some blog posts about who we were and how we thought, and we started some coffee things, but this thing just mushroomed. There was like coffees happening in China and Paris and Moscow, because there were lots of these people who were, wow, there's other people a bit like this out there who don't quite feel that they fit. We feel like outsiders. And it sort of exploded, but we didn't mean it to. We were just messing about on the internet, changing our job title on LinkedIn and all that stuff. So we never really did anything with it, but it stayed with us that the institutions have sort of failed them, and that there wasn't really a home for these non-linear people. And so really we've been messing about for about a year, and we knew we wanted to do three things. We wanted to help people at the edges of society. We wanted to do something with impact, so not B2B productivity apps. And also because we don't think that our leaders are very good, and they tend to come from a place of fear, not love, and they tend to be quite traumatized. How do we help over a long period of time create conscious leaders of the next generation? And so we were just helping people, just randomly just doing stuff. And then we came across a guy called Pete Denny, who's had a really interesting life. He used to be a hippie, then he was a consultant, then a coder and a CTO, and done all sorts of really interesting things. But he's obsessed by climate. And we're like, you know so much about climate. What would happen if you ran a fund investing in the best climate people? And he was like, I'd love that. And so we've got a model where we pay him a bit of money. He starts a fund, and it's called climate.vc. And we work together in making that a success. That seemed to work pretty well. So we then found a guy called Mike Kelly who does newfinance.vc. And there's now an Africa fund as well by a guy called Paul Smith who used to run Ignite. And the idea is that you find these people on the edge of society, you find out what they're literally obsessed by that has impact in the world, and you give them that head start where you give them a little bit of their cornerstone investment and help them get off the ground for the first year or so. and you're like, wow, where could you be in 10 years? And the beautiful thing is seeing what happens to people when they're in the right seat, when they've been sort of like jumping about before, doesn't quite feel right, but then they're doing the thing that feels like play. They're doing the thing that they would do if they had all the money anyway. And we're like, how many people in the world can you do that to? So yeah, plan is currently 17 funds, one for each UN Sustainable Development Goal, and get them to raise successfully. And then for Doug and I, we get to hang out with all these interesting people and then all the interesting founders that they invest in. And that just goes back to what an interesting world, a much more interesting world than doing it the normal way.
Yeah, amazing. Sounds like play for you as well, which I think is the point.
Life should be played for everybody. It's how we learn. Like, learning is error correction. And when we were kids, we thought nothing of just playing to learn and thinking of life as a game. And if you can get to the stage where life seems surreal, absurd, you can be a bit dour about it and go flow like water and not get too caught up in the world as should be, but adapt to how it is. I'm quite into Taoism. And then life feels a lot easier. Like, it shouldn't necessarily feel hard, even though it is for a lot of people, and lots of people are stuck in the trauma loop and they're on the hamster wheel. And of course, lots of people have hard lives, but it is that thing about, can you get to a stage where I think when you can perceive life as a game, it just puts a lot into perspective. It's like the sun will rise in the morning. And when things are a bit shit, you go, well, maybe it won't be shit tomorrow. And you can learn to laugh at crazy actors in your own particular play rather than get too stressed by them.
Yeah, that's a really powerful way. And I think there's the whole prevention versus promotion mindset, which I think that really leans into, as in you can go through life trying to prevent problems from happening versus trying to find like just being open to the chance of things being the best and not really being worrying about like the odd failure. And when you sort of just treat that as a game and that there's new opportunities that you haven't thought of yet coming in every different area, it's much more enjoyable. And take the whole thing less personally as well. Like the whole ego, I guess, is a big part of that, which is a super useful thing from the Vipassana, which is mostly around like loss of ego. And you get, after like 10 days of just being in your body and not moving and trying to get used to like your body just doing all these crazy weird sensations and pain and things, you sort of leave your own body and like look down on yourself and you're like, what is this thing that I call Sam Harris, and what's this point on here? And you get very detached and it's like, well, it doesn't really matter like what you've done with that thing or that thing, and it's much easier to not really care about things that go wrong. That's super powerful.
That's amazing. Did you feel like you did dissolve your ego by the end of those 10 days?
I'm not sure. I wouldn't say 100% dissolved my ego at all, but it definitely changed me a lot. And so some of my friends that I'd spent a lot more time with did sort of notice kind of changed on that. And it's not as good as it was when you first leave around the detachment, but it's easier to do that in the same way that, you know, you can talk about the universe and like the expanse of like billions of years of time and what is the point of anything. And you can kind of get really sort of large, big, expansive thinking, but you can't constantly be thinking that because you also sort of going through the day like, how do I put my foot in front of the other, and you've got to react to things, and so you can't sort of be in like 5 different brain states at once, but it does just like tend you towards like a slightly more expansive thinking, if that makes sense.
I think it's all just awareness. Like, it's almost like just going down the Russian dolls of consciousness, isn't it? And you've now got another level of awareness, which means you're on a path where you can keep going deeper over time as you just have more life experiences.
And when things do get a bit overwhelming and stuff, you sort of don't notice it's kind of getting worse until sort of you hit something where you're a bit like, oh, I just can't even do this. And then you do take that break and you let your brain sort of expand a bit as you go for like a long walk or something. You're like, oh yeah, it's why am I getting so caught up with this? It really doesn't matter. And I've come out to Lanzarote because I was running around London like a nutter over last month and like did get a bit too much to me. I actually started losing my short-term memory, which was ridiculous. I've never had that happen before. Yeah, super weird. But I just had too many things going on in my brain, and it was like struggling to prioritize what needed to be remembered. So I concluded I don't actually need to be in London, and I can be places where it's a bit nicer. I can feel like I'm looking after my health a bit more, be a bit less stressed, and still get lots of work done that are the important things I need to do, and it's helped me detach a bit from the craziness.
I think it is hard, though. Running a business with an ADD brain, where it's a blessing and a curse, isn't it? The curse is that you will see 700 ways around a problem. You'll have worked out the response to those 700 different things. And that's by like 8 o'clock in the morning. Do you know what I mean? And it's like, whenever I work with like, because I've worked with like, say, CEOs who are just super operational and they'll just go, right, boom, boom, that's a decision. And you go, but there's 20 other ways that could play. But there's a blissful, obviously it's also good to make lots of decisions, I would say. But the way my brain works, that would be such a blessing to live life in that bliss, that you genuinely believe, okay, that's input. I've got the solution there. Yep, that's the best I can think of. Go. You're like, fuck.
I do need to kind of think of ways to be better. Because like email or something, I'm just like, wow, there's like 1,000 ways I could answer this. And then I don't need to think about those 1,000 ways. It's like, what does this person need to know? Minimum things, send them that, nothing else, and life. But yeah, that's a nice tangent because of obviously, I think that's the thing that more people are realizing or struggle with. And it's certainly a factor in, I think, a lot of people who are a bit on the edges of society or trying to make their way as an entrepreneur do have like ADD or different ways of thinking. So how did you realize that you had it, and what did you then prioritize in your day versus how you used to go about things?
It was Rory Bremner. So basically, everyone always says you've probably got it. And I don't know about you, but you just don't. I just never bothered with the diagnosis. Don't even know why. But then there was a Rory Bremner show on it where he was saying, I'd be in there and I'd be talking to the plumber and we'd be chatting about the work and he'd turn away. And then the next thing you know, I'd be like swinging my golf club in a garden. And it was just comically like what I would do. And so I thought, right, okay, I better go and get diagnosed. And it was so brilliant for me, even though now I don't like the label actually, because I think that you can limit yourself by giving it the label. But at the time, it was the first time I'd introspected about how my brain worked. I had no idea people's brains functioned differently. And what it basically meant, it started a chain reaction. It meant, okay, one, understand how brain works. Two, be aware when you go into like mania, because my brain would be in like on all the time and I'd just be exhausted by the weekend every week, like nothing. Because I didn't say no to anyone. So I was like, yeah, I'd be able to do 1,000 things. And so that awareness was really important. Then being able to manage it and then doing lots of hacks on the things that help me manage that, everything from cold showers to meditation to trying medication that didn't work to blah, blah, blah. But what it really did is I went on a journey where the only way I can describe is I turned off my brain. So my version of Vipassana was for about 3 to 6 months, keep my calendar free, only do what my body wants to do at any particular moment. And I think looking back, I wasn't aware of this. That was my way of connecting with my inner self, whatever those words mean. These things are ineffable, so I don't think you can find perfect words for them. But it was more me. And so I cut out the things that weren't me. I stopped trying to please other people. I stopped being other people's expectations. And I just went beast mode on me. And I didn't care what people thought. And it was really interesting. When I didn't care what people thought, I was more interesting on social and in life. And people seemed to want to be around me more or hear from me more, when I was just, rather than being scared about what other people thought, just almost going, don't give a shit mode was really helpful. So it helped me in all the ways. I went through this battle of, should I go there, which is unknown. We talked about that at the beginning, doing all those things that I talked about, leave the job I was in and all the scary things that ensued. So one side of me was going, stay where the money is, be super rational, don't be crazy. But the other was, go crazy as fuck, who cares? And so I came out the other side, just feeling more aligned and serene, knowing me more, knowing more of what I want in the world. And it just seems life is simpler and less noisy now. It's not perfect, obviously, but it feels less noisy.
Nice. Definitely sounds like it's more fun and suiting you. So how did you manage? So I guess obviously you take meetings now, but how did you manage then being able to start a company that starts VCs and things in a way that sort of works for your new schedule and allows you to do
I think it's about, I think it's about, again, I've found a gang of people who let me be me. So I think the environment, like you can be the same person, you can be put in two different environments and think you're Superman or think you're an absolute twat. And I've been in those environments. I've been in environments where I feel protected and loved and like I can fly, and ones where I honestly just question myself and just go, I'm obviously rubbish. And that just gets me into a spiral of ugh. And so I think it just goes back to finding the right people around you. Doug and the gang at Potential are just very aligned about the values and what we see in the world. And I think it's created a good culture. It just feels like it's the kind of culture where people can be them and they can do what they're best at and not worry too much about what they're bad at.
That sounds amazing. And I definitely relate to the feeling of when you're around some people where you just feel like really awesome the whole time and you're like, this is great, killing it. And then other people where you're like, I'm just an idiot. I have zero talent or value to anyone. I can't do anything. I'm just running into brick walls the entire time, and there's no point in me doing anything.
And it could be one person, by the way. It can just be your boss. That's why I always say to people, which is they worry about what company to work for. I go, it's all about the person or people you work for. That's it. Nothing else matters. That will dictate your whole life.
Well, cool. Then how do you go around? So you said you sort of did the writing on the internet and stuff, but how do you go around finding people these days for Potential?
They tend to appear. So what often happens, until recently, I used to do a lot of stuff on social, and people would always say there's something that resonates. They wouldn't quite know what, but they'd resonate with institutions not working for them, or feeling like they're in a trauma loop or on a hamster wheel, and not feeling like there's a place for more diverse people. So it tends to self-select and then be recursive. And those people tend to find other people like that. And I think it's just basically slowly and surely gathering like this interesting group of people from the edge of society who are brilliant, but the world has been molded by industrialization and specialization and tried to take their edges off. And like I say, I think just intimating that there might be a home for them. And by the way, we've only got 3 funds at the moment that we've just started, so we probably won't do any more in the foreseeable future, next 6 months at least. And we've got a small team of people helping them. So we're not huge, but we, like I said at the beginning, because we've been around helping a lot of people for no reason over a decade or so, I think there's like a gang of people who just are interested and interesting that we've built up over time.
Yeah, hiring Surface Cycle was an interesting one. But you said you need to leave soon. So any imparting advice? I think you've probably covered this, but just as like a short sort of maximum 1 minute of what you would tell yourself if you could at 20 years old kind of thing.
I would tell everyone as a thought experiment, just give all your energy to other people and just go and help as many people as you can and watch life secretly, magically work itself out, but without too much of a preordained plan.
Let the magic of chance do its work and see where you end up. I like it. I definitely think instead of having like a strategy of exactly want this, you kind of just get beaten by the waves of life as opposed to a strategy of how to react to life and then surfing the waves kind of thing.
Yes, it's almost like expose yourself to all the waves, see where the waves sort of buffer you to. It's like having a fixed plan. Everyone says have a fixed plan. And yeah, true. If you know you want to be an Olympic gold medalist, then sacrifice everything, single-minded of the goal, absolutely. But not everyone's going to be in the top 0.1% of things in the world. And so I think no one ever teaches you to just wander in the woods and see where it takes you. And I think more people should, because I think lots of people are very unhappy and I think life works very well for them. And I think they're told a lot of stories because we're just narrative sponges, which make them feel like they have to have a plan, they have to have a goal. It's not to say don't have goals, but they can be very fuzzy and you can be very flexible on the details of how you can get there. And I think that if you accept the world as chaos and that we're imposing some kind of false order on it, then I think you're much more likely to find your seat in the world.
They're a big believer in that. And yeah, I think it's really important to expose yourself to more things when you're younger. And there's like I think there's a big rush in society, like get the great job or start earning money. And like there's always talk about like start saving for your pension when you're 20 because it'll be worth so much more when you're older and you're just planning for your retirement already. And it's like, well, you can take shorter retirements to kind of enjoy your life along the way and expose yourself to different stuff. And yeah, important. Could talk about that for ages, but I think you do actually need to go somewhere apparently. So let's finish the podcast and thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Sam. Enjoyed it.
Cheers. Well, thank you so much for Alex coming on the show. I hope you took something from the conversation, and I really think that his acceptance of who he was and trying to fit into a mold and instead just relaxing into being himself, instead of seeking out the people that can accept you as you are, is a really nice way of living. And it's something that I struggled with when I was younger. And with age, realized this didn't matter that much. And I would say that if you are kind of young, this might feel like a harder thing to accept when you haven't got so many opportunities and you do feel like you need to please everyone. But honestly, life isn't as hard or overwhelming as you think it is. And when you try to go a little bit less fast and look for things that are correct for you as opposed to racing after every opportunity as soon as you see it, life does get just a bit more rewarding and more enjoyable. So not a race, it is something that is just to be enjoyed in the long term, and it's definitely much more worth spending time with people you like than trying to achieve something, but spending time with people who are idiots. Anyway, if you enjoyed the show and you liked it, well, you can show your respect for the show by giving me a good rating on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or of course YouTube, where you're also welcome to leave any kind of comments around questions that you might have for me or changes that you want in the show, things you want me to talk about, guests and stuff. I will be very much looking into this, and we are building out our content plans for next year. So please hit me up. And then remember that life is to be enjoyed. Enjoyment is not something you should put off after some future goal has been achieved. It is definitely something that needs to happen every day of your life. Gratitude and enjoyment is something that should be happening every day of your life. So don't waste it waiting for some future thing that might never happen. So be kind to yourself, and whilst you're at it, be kind to someone else too.